Next up, I would like to introduce Paige Richards. She is our next guest. She is the Vice President of Operations for 90 Works. She has been with the organization for 8 years and currently oversees supportive services for homeless families, the Family Support Team, and other housing programs. Paige is a Pensacola native, and her passion is to serve the community she has loved for so long. While studying social work at the University of West Florida, Paige served as the president of the Student Social Work Association during this time. With her peers and professors, they held trips to Tallahassee, meeting with representatives from Circuit 1 on social justice initiatives. Before her promotion in 2020, Paige served as the program manager of the Family Support Team, working with families at high risk of child abuse and neglect. She enjoys working at both the micro and macro level of social work. Driven by the 90 Works mission, Paige is committed to advancing the 90 Works case management model, Project 90, to help people move out of poverty. Without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Paige, who will be talking to us about transitioning out of homelessness. Paige, you're on.
Hello, thanks for having me. I'm a bit of a late substitute for someone else last week, so my slideshow is going to be a lot shorter today. So again, I'm really thankful to be here and be amongst people in our community that are serving this population. So I'm going to do what Crystal showed me how to do, and I'm going to share my screen real quick. Okay, so this is, like they said, I'm Vice President of Operations in Florida, and going to speak on behalf of what we're doing here at 90 Works to help people transition out of homelessness. So our slideshow is going to kind of keep me on track and make sure we're on time today. So the first question I had when they asked me to fill this spot was, what is transitioning out of homelessness? So it's not going to be a poll that comes up, but if you have a piece of paper, just jot down really quick, like, what do you think that is? What does transitioning out of homelessness really mean? It's a system word that we use and utilize often, but what does that look like to you? So I'm going to be curious and to see what you guys have to say, and we'll look back at it in a little bit. So while we're doing that, I think it really goes well with what Charles was presenting just a second ago. Is it's very clear transitioning out of homelessness isn't just a burden of the person who is experiencing instability in their housing, rather a community problem that we need to face together. So I think that's important when we're viewing transitioning out of homelessness. I'm just going to start with the best way I know how. I asked a peer of mine how she would talk about transitioning out of homelessness, and she said, share a success story or share one of your stories. So that's what I'm going to do today. Hopefully it will be a meaningful time for you all. I started at 90 Works. It was actually called Families Count at the time, and I was working with a mom who was dealing with chronic homelessness and had been couch surfing pretty much her entire adult life. I walk into the room, so I'm just going to kind of give you the backdrop. I walk in, I'm very young, very new at this journey, and I walk in and I have my nurturing parenting book, because that's what I'm supposed to do, is help her with parenting. And I walk out and she gives me 3 bills, and she's like, no, we can't talk about that today. I'm going to give you these three bills. It was a power bill and some other variations along there. And so I bring them back to my supervisor, and they're like, yeah, we can help. Well, by the time I get to my next appointment, just a few days later with her, she's been evicted. And that wasn't one of the bills she gave me. And unfortunately, she had lost everything. When they locked her out, we had no beds for kids, we had nothing. And so I'm feeling pretty, I just didn't feel like I could help, because here I am with my little parenting book, gonna teach her about positive and negative feelings when we're dealing with nowhere to sleep, no food, no transportation, nothing. So it was pretty much divine timing, if you ask me. 90 Works made the transition from Families Count to 90 Works, and so around our model, and so we started implementing that. So I was literally trained on our Project 90 model during my case management with this customer, and we were sitting there together. This mom didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. How was I going to help her get out of this cycle? She was defeated. The Department of Children and Families were closing in. She had already lost children. Her rights had been terminated to older children. And she was like, I don't want that to happen again. And she looked at me and just said, help me. And so thankfully, we started implementing these other things. And we began on a journey for the both of us. Our mission at 90 Works became overcoming and preventing homelessness, poverty, and family violence by becoming self-sufficient. We focus on 6 areas of self-sufficiency, and you can see those on the slideshow: housing, income, transportation, health, safety, and support. And so we basically, I go to her and I say, what's really going on here? Why can't we keep you housed? You're smart, you're bright, you always end up back doing it on your own. So why can't we keep you there? What's the deficit? What are we missing here? So we, and I can remember the next part so clearly, and I'm sure that you all have a memory like this too. I'm sitting on her, she found a month-to-month lease. We're sitting on her floor because again, we've lost it. She's lost everything. We have nothing to start with. And it was like this old blue shaggy carpet, and we're sitting on it. And she's like, I want this to be my home. I don't want to move again. This is very important to me. And so we made a pact right there on that blue floor that we were going to keep her there, and we were going to help identify what was going on and why she couldn't stay housed. She was very used to the system. She had been helped by many programs before, but she just couldn't overcome. So we took a bit of a different approach. We started looking at her housing, and obviously we knew that her housing was poor. So it was vulnerable at the time. She was in crisis. She did not have a way to pay the next month's bills, and what were we going to do? So luckily with our program, we do have temporary financial assistance. So with the TFA, we were able to put a couple months in. That way we had some time to work on these other things and get to the root of the problem. We go through income because, well, obviously you need income to continue to pay. Well, she doesn't really have a long job history. We don't, most of it has been under the table. And I said, well, why haven't you had another job? And kind of came up that she didn't have the proper identification to proceed with an application. So we wrote that as a barrier on the case plan, and we moved on to transportation. Well, at transportation, she had someone who had given her a vehicle, but she couldn't use it because she didn't have a license. So no license. We go to health. She has no health insurance, no benefits at all. So she wasn't receiving any health benefits, nor her children. And I'm like, well, why? You would definitely qualify. Let's get this going. But again, we were met with a barrier, and you're probably catching a theme that she didn't have the proper identification you need to file for any of those benefits. Okay. So then obviously the safety is, we're looking at the safety of her and her kids. There was a history of that DV in this family. And a lot of that was because, like we were talking about in the previous presentation, she was just trying to survive and make ends meet. So she would live with people who weren't the safest to be able to pay her bills, or them to pay her bills. So that didn't work. This is a generational thing for her. So we're at support. She doesn't have any positive supports in her life that are appropriate for her and her children. So she doesn't have no family around. The family that she does have were not appropriate, and they are not local. So then we get down to life skills and we realize she's really stuck in a fight or flight kind of life skill situation. She's a fighter. She's just trying to get to the next day. And that's never going to create a stable home life environment. So as we continued, this ID thing kept coming back up and we're like, what's going on here? So come to find out, after some digging, and we're about 6 months in at this point, thinking, okay, we'll just get you an ID. That's easy enough. You know, I've done that. When I got married, I had to change over. So we'll just go down there, we'll pay a little fee, and we'll move right along. Well, it's funny, to get a copy of your identification, you actually have to have another form of identification. And so again, I know that you guys have all been here because it's a super frustrating process. And so you're sitting there and we're like, okay, well, let's go find one. Well, she doesn't even have, they're like, maybe a bill in her name. Well, she didn't have bills in her name because she couldn't have them. So she had landlords that had it, and that's how she got in the cycle in the first place. So, okay, we're going to go back to the drawing board. We need an ID. So she wasn't local. She wasn't even from the United States. She was legally here. We knew that, but we had no idea how we were going to get this main paperwork. So like I said, we were able to stabilize for now a Band-Aid with some temporary financial assistance. It was a big part of her success in the long run. We kept going back and forth. So we're like, okay, let's start with the birth certificate. Well, this was a very unique situation to this area. She had to have a checking account in her name with the money drafted out of that account to apply for the birth certificate. So most of our communities, they're not having a checking account in their name. She doesn't have this kind of money. So we go and we find ourselves a bank and we're going to open up her first checking account. Except you probably guessed, you have to have ID and you can't put that in. So here we are, like finally thought we had an answer, but we can't actually get her a checking account because she does not have ID. So this ID thing became a much bigger issue in the long run than we could have ever imagined. So I'm working on another case. It's child welfare related, and I'm doing some stuff helping the mom get her kids registered for school. And in the file, I see that there's an ID for the child, and I thought, she doesn't have parents, but she went to school at some point. So somewhere, somebody had some kind of identification, and it was kind of a long shot, but we got some releases, and I had an MSW student assigned to me, so we were working together, and we did some digging, and we finally found, and we got some releases, and we called these places, and most people were like, that was, this wasn't a very young mom, that was way long time ago, that was, you're asking me to look for 20 years ago. We don't have that. It's not online. Like we don't have that. So pretty defeated. At this point, if it wasn't for the MSW student with me, I'm pretty sure I would have had to give up, because I just thought, this is hopeless. We're not going to get there. And I'm the professional in this situation. This mom is frustrated. She has lost her temper. She has said things to people. So I'm trying to model pro-social skills, but I'm also frustrated because this nowhere we turn seems to have an answer. It's all just negatives. And so we can't help her get anywhere different than where she is because she's stuck with this one seemingly small issue. So about a year into the case, where mom has she's, like I said, she's a fighter, she's a survivor. She's gotten some income by working a deal out with the landlord and this and that. She's trying to make it work. This is not a lack of will on her part. And I get a call, and it's from some lady that the story resonated with at the school. And she's like, look, anytime I've had a chance over the last 4 months, I've been looking to see if I could find some kind of identification. Well, she found one. This little tiny thing. It was very blurry, but she scanned it right over. And so then we were like, okay, we can do this. We're back on. We finally found a local, no bank, but it was a credit union that would accept this form of identification. It wasn't their typical, what you would open with a checking account. So it was so nice. And then we're so excited, except that they wanted to charge her about triple what it would cost myself to go in and open a checking account with the proper identification. So they were doing her a favor by charging her triple to have, and that's how they viewed it. So, so then a whole new story how are we going to put this? You know, grant money can't, and funder money can't put money into someone's checking account. So what are we going to do here? This is now not only the cost of the actual birth certificate, but the cost of just opening the account. So thankfully at 90 Works, we do have very, very small of unrestricted funding from donations and things like that. So Kate, our CEO, approved it, and we put that in her account. So 6 months later, so we're now at a year and a half, we finally get a birth certificate for this mom. That is the most overly simplified version of the story I could give you. It was hard for all of us. We were tired, we were frustrated. I was pretty disappointed in the system of itself, because there was no way to win. We couldn't help this mom get a win. And finally, a year and a half later, we were able to do that. It was one of the things what we talk about with life skills is the things we take for granted. So for me personally, it was a wake-up call, because I remember very clearly my mom giving me this pretty little file and telling me, here's all of you're a grown-up now, here's all of your stuff, your birth certificate, you know, copies of your IDs, your social security, all of it was in this little thing. And she's like, and you'll need to keep this, and you'll need to put your husband's in it, and when you have kids, and I still have that today, and my kids' stuff is in it, and it's in a safe spot. And she taught me how important that was. But that was not something that this mom was set up with. She wasn't set up for success in that way. So a lot of times we end up, even in our systems, with that stigma of, I was just talking to some peers today, and they said, you know, the way our family, like, why don't they just get a job and keep it? Or why don't they just pay their bills first? Or why do they have a nice car, but they don't have, you know, and they have all of these answers. And well, yeah, I mean, if they did pay their bills, they probably wouldn't get evicted, but it's not usually that they've just budgeted poorly is not the root cause. Now they may need budgeting. That's a life skill that we all need. And I always need more budgeting skills, but they weren't set up that way. We're dealing with generational chronic homelessness in this situation. And she knew no different. She didn't know you were supposed to have all of those things. So now she has her toolbox, she has her kit, she has her identification, she gets a job that is stable and pays much better. We get the kids into, we still don't have transportation at this time, but they were able to now get picked up. Because she qualified for benefits, which made her qualify for some of these daycare transportation. So everything just finally, after a year and a half, started really fitting together, and this mom became successful. We have a way that we follow up with some of our customers, which we did. And we kept up with this mom for a while, and someone who had her rights terminated, which usually they don't have success with other children, that it just it's a hard situation. She has not been back into the child welfare system. She has not been evicted. She is successful, and she's providing for her children. And it was something as silly and simple as just having the right IDs to be able to access the resources she needed in the community to get into that entry level, just like we were seeing in that first presentation, is that if we're stuck in this middle part, she wasn't just stuck there, she was stuck at even getting anything she could rent. So she now has a job that they put money straight into her bank account, and she's not having to go ask someone to cash things for her. And everything began to fall together for this mom. So I think the point is, I think all of us can relate to a story like this. She's just one of many, of course, that I've worked with along the way, but she always stuck out to me because she was such a fighter. You know, I don't think anything that we did with this would be considered rocket science. I mean, it was pretty simple. It became very evident that she needed the identification. There wasn't but what it took was persistence. And this wasn't something that this mom could have done by just pulling up her pants and doing a better job like people wanted to view her as. Like, if you just tried harder, mom, like if you just stuck with it, mom, if you just fill in the blank, you could fix it. And so obviously we see that the system itself is very broken, and and a lot of times disjointed and not connected. And what we realize here when we're looking at these matrix areas for 90 works is they're so interconnected, and whether the system recognizes them as being connected can be a problem, but in real life they are. They all go hand in hand. In circuit one and in our areas, Pensacola is one of the only places that has a transportation system. Everywhere else is very spread out. So when in the earlier presentation, when he's talking about sidewalks, I'm like, there isn't even anything to walk to. You could have a sidewalk, but where are they going? So like there's not just a place where they can just go get a job as easily as some of these other places. So we deal with very specific needs here in Northwest Florida because we can't just give them a card to get them started at that first job. You know, they're having to utilize friends and ride sharing, which gas money. So we're still talking cost, and an unreliable person, because a friend can choose to do something else that day than take you to work. So as we begin to look at all of these areas of the matrix and really get people to understand, okay, I can provide this for myself, then we really are setting them up for some success. One of the things I think that we used to tell people, this is up until January, if you wanted a job in the area, we'll help you get a job. If you're willing to work, we'll help you find one. But we're facing a new problem, obviously, today after the COVID-19 pandemic. Things are tough. They're not as easy to get the job. There's less TFA or temporary financial assistance in the community in the sense of informal places. So if they, to really do that prevention, for some people, maybe calling a church. My husband's an associate pastor. Churches are taking a hit during this COVID as well as congregations are. So they're not able to do maybe some of the things they are. And so the list continues. I had a mom call our church and my husband connected her to me. She didn't qualify for any of our services at 90 Works. So I was just trying to help navigate for her, tell her about some resources. This mother was different. She was situationally homeless, not chronic. She had never been homeless before. And it was all due to, she lost her job due to COVID-19. She was a guardian to her grandchildren and it just wasn't working. She couldn't find, she was met at, I don't know, it was somewhere in our area of care, because she had called some numbers and someone had mentioned something to her, like when she was applying for funds, said, well, if I help you feed your grandkids, I won't be able to feed my grandkids tonight. And so when she talked to me, she was defeated. She was crying. She's like, she was embarrassed because she thought, I can't believe I would never ask anybody for, for them to sacrifice like that for me. I just don't know what to do. I'm at my wit's end. I'm going to give up. And so it's finding what her root cause was. Well, for her, it was this very specific COVID issue. She had put a deposit down. She was ready to move in, had everything down. She had her monthly income worked out. But because of COVID, they weren't doing walkthroughs at the apartment, so she couldn't get the signature. We were just waiting on a physical signature to get her in to stable housing. So here she is, a grandma, having all these kiddos that she's guardian of right now in a hotel room that, that was only made for a few people, and she lived there for months. And so once we finally, the system kind of caught up to COVID and they did some virtual things, she was able to get into that housing. But we know that's coming more and more and more. We're not going to have TFA from churches. We do have, some people are getting CARES Act money, which is great, but those are very specific, sometimes have very specific rigid funding rules, which is why it's nice to have those informal supports that you can use to meet the specific need, because it's not always going to be the same thing. And there's less jobs. There's just not jobs right now that like there were. And so we don't know when or if they will come back after. So the people that we would call and be like, hey, I got so-and-so, they're really ready to work. Can you get them a job? Well, right now they may not even have a job, because that's the reality of the world we're living in. The burden of maintaining a home and stable housing is on the customer or the client that we're working with, of course. But truthfully, in the first presentation just goes with this so beautifully, because it's not just that they have a lack of willpower on the part of the population we're serving. They may have a lack of willpower now because they've experienced this for so long, and they're tired and they're frustrated and they've not had a win. So I hope, so I think we have to challenge ourselves. We have to challenge ourselves, because when we say something like transitioning out of homelessness, that can be overly simplistic in just a few words, when the process itself is so intricate and so long and hard, and they have to use life skills they've never been taught. If you call and cuss out the landlord, that's probably not going to get you into that place. But you can advocate for yourself, and there's ways to do that. So it's a process, it's a learning, it's a partnership between you and that customer. And I know that y'all know this is a calling. This job isn't for everyone. People get in here and they hear that story and they're like, I'm out of here. That's not for me. I'm not doing that. And then others, yes, this is me. I want to help. I want to meet them. I want to partner. So I hope that's you today. I hope that you want to partner with our families and want to serve the community and help see them be stably and safe housed, but not just for the sake of being housed, but because it brings stability to their whole life. 90 Works does, we do a training on a more in-depth intro. It's a free webinar for our Project 90 matrix areas. I don't want to oversell it though. We don't always have success, of course. We still have people who fall off and who aren't committed or aren't ready. Maybe they're still in a cycle of trauma or abuse and violence, and they can't make that break to be ready to make some of these changes, because you really have to be ready in that, and in the stages of change, you have to be willing and observant that something has to change in their life. So obviously this isn't like a magic wand. We can't go in there, but when you have a person who wants to and is trying, getting to the root of the issue, because it would have looked really nice on the surface and just say to this mom just needs to get a job. This mom just needs to da, da, da. And we can even fall into that cycle, because we're hearing it so much from people who aren't in it with us, who aren't in the trenches, if you will, of working with this population. And again, as we keep hearing, and I'm sure it's just going to be the trend of today, is how much we're impacted by what is available in the community. I hope that my story has been somewhat meaningful to you today. I look forward to working with the communities in our community together. I think that just like we were saying with the disjointed, I think if community partners and we try to bring our part of the system more integrated, and I see that we are like something like this is a great forum for that, and continuing to do it in the future, that's when we can really help our families, because we're not just putting a Band-Aid and we're not just putting them in there for a moment, but we're using those fundings with a purpose to get them to their next step. We'll have a learning curve with after the COVID-19, obviously. We're gonna have to figure out what a new normal looks like here in Pensacola, and how big the impact is going to be once when things pick back up, hopefully. So thank you for your time today. I do actually have to cut checks later, so I think they said we'll do question and answers now instead of later, because I'm gonna have to leave. But like I said, I hope today was meaningful. You know, it is deeply meaningful to us here at 90 Works, and I know that it's a special calling for people who work in this community. So thank you for all your hard work, and let me be a part of it.
Thank you so much, Paige. That was a very interesting presentation that you gave us, and we do have a few questions. You answered some of the questions. One of them talked about people on the lower end of the housing continuum, particularly homelessness, situational homeless and chronic homeless, and do they require more case management? Your unique story, I think, says yes to that. If you need to add something else to it, please let me know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yes, definitely. There's not a a magic wand that just makes all their problems go away. And there is a lot of persistence. But what we realize, if we can get them to buy in, it really shows about 90 days if you're on the right way to success, or if we're both equally committed to seeing them, safe and stably housed.
Yeah. The other question I have is, it talks or speaks to the 6 area of the domains that you talked about: the housing, income, transportation, health, safety, and support, and life skills as well, because those are, you put all those together, are various. My question here talks about, you all particularly don't have all of the resources to address all of the people who come through your doors in these particular areas. Do you currently partner with specific organizations, or do you partner with the county or any one city along those lines to provide those services?
Yeah, well, we'll partner with anybody that wants to partner, because that's the idea. Yeah, we do have, like most places, we have our funding is limited to certain populations. So like one of them is homeless veteran families, or veterans. And we have a specific financial area where we work with children, like families who are in the child welfare system. So that's specific. Our CEO, Kate, she is very passionate about fundraising outside of, so we have unrestricted funding. Obviously, it's not, that doesn't come pouring in like you would hope. So we do have that when those situations arise, but you're right, there's not. And so it does take a level of partnering with people, reaching out into the community to figure out. We do have several churches that have assist along the way. That's really helped when kind of like they know that, okay, we're gonna partner with you because we know that they're working hard to better themselves.
Well, thank you for that, ma'am. I do have one other question I think I want to try to get in, because it has two or three likes on it. Can you expand upon how housing, stable and affordable housing, affects all aspects of a person or family's life? I want to make sure this was one that was directed at you, and if you can answer it, I'd really appreciate it, because I know you have to get off the line and go cut those checks. If not, I'll make sure I direct it towards the rest of the.
Oh, sure. So housing. One way that when we started with this, that our CEO said it was, how can you go to a job that pays well and is stable and reliable, right? That what we want, if you can't shower, or if you can't feed your children, or if y'all slept in a car, or if having the housing is definitely important. And so when we can use temporary financial assistance, if it's not something that they have at their disposal income right now, is finding them that stable. Because until I often joke in the interviews I had with Kate along the way that it's really a model that Jesus used. And I say that because even Jesus met people's physical needs before he shared his story with people. So when he fed the 5,000, when he turned the water, so when you're looking at it, sometimes you have to meet people's basic needs. And we see that in Maslow's hierarchy of needs as well, that before we can expect any kind of self-actualization, they have to be able to know that their kids are going to be safe tonight, or themselves, that they're not going to be in harm that night. And so there's a lot, especially when you're dealing with generational, they are scared. They know, like, they are not going to a shelter for any reason like that, because a lot of them have experienced things at shelters, so it has a stigma for them. So there's a lot of reasons, obviously, but if you have a safe place to rest your head, it doesn't, like we said earlier, it can be small, it doesn't have to be fancy, but just somewhere that's safe for them to begin to think outside of that survival mode, that fight or flight, to be able to look at the big picture and calm down, the calming long enough to see, okay, yeah, I really do need a better job, or I really do need to move somewhere where I have access to transportation and support.
Well, Paige, as always, I appreciate you for coming on and helping us out with our summit here today. Let Kate know I said hello, and thank her for allowing you to come on. If we have any other follow-up questions, I'm sure Kristen will submit those to you for your answers. And we appreciate you for your involvement in today's summit. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.